Lectures on the Basics of Biblical Greek. Chapter 12. Before we turn to Lesson 12, let's review a bit. And nothing is more important than to know the case-ending chart for working with nouns and related forms in Biblical Greek. By now, the first and second declension chart, the 2-1-2 chart, the first three columns here, should be very familiar to you. Sigma, nothing, new, upsilon, sigma, upsilon, iota, 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 all subscripted, nu, 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 iota, iota, alpha, omega nu, omega nu, omega nu, iota sigma, iota sigma, iota sigma, upsilon sigma, sigma alpha. And becoming almost as familiar ought be the third declension chart, where masculine and feminine are of the same form and neuter are different in the nominative and accusative. So sigma, nothing, the new form for the genitive singular, omicron sigma, the dative singular, iota and iota, although it does not subscript under a consonant, alpha or nu for the accusative singular, nothing for the neuter, epsilon sigma, a new one for the nominative plural, alpha, omega nu for the genitive plural, very familiar by now, sigma iota for the dative plural, just the opposite of what was the case in the first and second declensions, and then the accusative plural, alpha sigma and alpha. In our last lesson, we learned the first and second person pronouns, the pronouns for I, we, and you. The chart is before you, and it doesn't hurt to review it as well. Remember, there's an alternate form for the first and second person singular pronouns. That alternate form is either used for emphasis or it often shows up with a preposition, not conveying emphasis. In terms of the plurals, the key is distinguishing hemes from hemes, and there the upsilon or you is helpful. In our last lesson, we learned more third declension patterns, such as those ending in tau and delta, with the genitives karitos, photos, and elpidos. These are all dentals, where the dental drops out in the nominative singular. We learned the somewhat unusual forms of pistis because the stem here is a consonantal iota. It looks like a iota or epsilon, but it functions like a consonant, giving somewhat unusual forms such as the genitive singular pisteos or the nominative plural pistes, which interestingly is identical to the accusative plural, pistes. And we also learned the patterns for pater and hedor. With pater, the vowel of the second consonant ablouts, that sometimes it's present, sometimes it lengthens, sometimes it drops out. With hedor, we have a case of a stem that ends in a tau, but in the nominative and accusative singular, the form is quite different. After this review, we turn to the current lesson, which is, in many ways, quite easy. We'll be learning the third person pronoun, autos, and it has no new forms. So for this lesson, we're just reviewing case endings. What is unique about this lesson is that the word autos can function three ways. It has three different uses, and we'll look at those in turn with examples. Present on this side is the fully inflected chart of the forms of autos, the third person pronoun. If you look down the first column, you see the very familiar endings of the second declension: sigma, upsilon, subscripted iota, nu, iota, omega nu, iota sigma, and upsilon sigma. In the second column, you see the familiar endings of the first declension feminine. Nothing, sigma, subscripted iota, nu, iota, omega nu, iota sigma, sigma. It's in the neuters of the second declension that one difference shows up. Instead of a nu for the case ending of the nominative and accusative singular, there is no case ending. So the forms are auta, autu, auto, auta, and then what one would expect in the plurals. So for this lesson, we are merely reviewing familiar case endings. And we have seen this ending in the nominative and accusative singular, no, nu for certain neuters, previously. For example, with the adjective allos. The easy part of this lesson is over. Now a somewhat more challenging part, the three uses of autos. Use number one is the one with which you have some familiarity already, where autos functions as the personal pronoun. Autos meaning he, aute meaning she, auta meaning it, and then autoi, autai, and auta meaning they, the different genders depending on the antecedent. Here are some examples of that first use or pronomial use of autos. Hahuios autes would be translated her son. Lege autois would be translated he, she, or it is speaking to them. Pherusin autus to Jesu, they bring them to Jesus. The case of the pronoun is determined by its use in the sentence, but its person and number are determined by its antecedent. And here it gets a little tricky. If the antecedent is personal, referring to a particular person, autos follows natural gender. So if the antecedent is Paulos, the form of autos that would be used would be autos. However, if the antecedent is not personal, we're referring to a generic child, ta teknon, rather than ha Paulos, then autos follows grammatical gender, and we would use the neuter form, auto. The second use of autos is as an adjectival intensitive. It's possible to recognize this form when autos is modifying a word in the same clause, and autos is usually in the predicate position. That means it does not have an article in front of it. The adjectival intensive is translated with the reflexive in English: himself, herself, themselves. And as an aside, autos in the nominative always intensifies, although sometimes that's a little bit awkward to translate in English, and so we just go with the pronoun. But it is there for emphasis. Notice in this clause, auto agrees with logo in case, gender, and number. There's a word it modifies, but auto does not have an article in front of it, so it's in the predicate position. This clause would be translated in the word itself. In this second example, auton is in the predicate position. It has no article, but it modifies a noun, Jesun, and so it also is an intensifier. They saw Jesus himself. If an author wishes to intensify a second or first person subject, the author can use the adjectival intensive autos to do so. Autos, in this case, in the predicate position, modifies the subject si. You yourself are speaking to her. The third use of autos, and it only happens occasionally in the New Testament, it's the least frequent of the three, is as the identical adjective. This usage is identified when autos is normally in the attributive position and agrees with the word modified in case, gender, and number. The translation then is the identical adjective same. So again, attributive position with the word modified, translation same. Hoi autoi apostoloi. Autos is in the attributive position. It follows an article, and it has a noun that it modifies in case, gender, or number. The same apostles. Ta auto biblion, again, in the attributive position following the article and with a noun. The same book. Normally, that's the sequence. But on occasion, autos will be in the predicate position, and yet it makes more sense to translate it as the identical adjective. The following quote: "Some Pharisees came to him," understood. Would that be in the hour itself or in the same hour? Even though this is in the predicate position, the use of autos, it's probably should be translated with the identical adjective same. In the same hour, some Pharisees came. That's the lesson. A chance to review the second and first declension case endings with the forms of autos and its three uses: as a pronoun, as an intensifier, or as the adjective same, the identical adjective.